Looks like we're in for another bedtime story. That's what Representative Jasmine Crockett said into a live mic while Senator John Kennedy stood to speak on the House floor. The room chuckled. Her allies smiled. And for a moment, it looked like Kennedy had walked right into her trap. But instead of reacting, Kennedy calmly adjusted his glasses, looked directly at Crockett, and said, "Representative Crockett, I'd like to tell you a story, not about me, but about someone who might matter to you." And just like that, the laughter died. You could feel it, the sudden shift in the room. Eyes turned. Phones were lowered. Crockett's smirk began to fade. "Years ago," Kennedy began, "I came across a small article buried deep in a Dallas community newsletter. Just a few paragraphs. About a man who worked as a janitor at Booker T. Washington High School." No one interrupted. No one laughed this time. He didn't make speeches. He didn't run for office. But he noticed things like the kids who stayed late because they had nowhere else to go. He saw their hunger, not just for food, but for hope. Kennedy's voice remained calm, deliberate. That janitor saw art programs getting cut, music rooms locked up, and no one saying a word. So one night, at a school board meeting, he stood up. No one expected anything from a janitor. But he asked one question. He paused. "How are our kids supposed to dream if we take away the tools they need to imagine?" The room fell into a deeper silence. Crockett sat still now, no reaction, just watching. That question didn't make the news. But weeks later, those programs were restored. Paintbrushes came back. So did music. So did a little bit of hope. And then came the punchline no one was ready for. That janitor was your grandfather, Representative Crockett. There it was, a congressional mic drop, not with a shout, but with the truth that cut deeper than any insult ever could. Crockett blinked, her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Because Kennedy wasn't just telling a story, he was reminding her who she was. The room didn't move, not a sound, not a whisper. Senator Kennedy took out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, worn, like it had been carried for years. "This," he said, "is the note my staff wrote when Samuel Crockett called my office." He held it up, not as a prop, but as proof. He didn't ask for help, didn't request a meeting. He just wanted to say thank you for a vote I cast that helped protect community school funding. Crockett sat back in her chair, her hands clenched slightly on the desk. You could tell this wasn't political anymore. This was personal. This was her family. "How do you know this is real?" she asked, her voice lower now, not defiant, but searching. Kennedy nodded, calmly, "Because I remembered that call. And when I saw his name years later in that newsletter, I knew it wasn't just a coincidence. I called someone in Dallas, someone who used to work at that school." They remembered Samuel Crockett, remembered the night he stood up and spoke. He looked straight at her now. "They told me about a boy named Marcus Tate, one of the students who kept his music lessons because of your grandfather." Kennedy's tone softened. "Today, Marcus is a music teacher, still in Dallas, still passing on what your grandfather helped save." The weight of that hit hard. Crockett didn't speak, but you could see it in the way her posture changed, in the way her gaze dropped to the floor. This wasn't the moment she expected when she mocked him, and it definitely wasn't the story she thought she'd hear. Senator Kennedy didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He just said, "I didn't bring this up to win an argument. I brought it up because sometimes we forget what this fight is really about. It's not about us. It's about the people who came before us and the ones who still need us." The silence in that chamber was sacred now, because one janitor, who had nothing but courage and a question, had changed more than just one school. He had left behind a legacy, and his granddaughter was only just discovering it. Jasmine Crockett leaned toward her mic, the fire in her voice gone, replaced by something unfamiliar. "Senator Kennedy, I didn't know any of that." She paused, swallowed. "My grandfather never told me about that meeting, never mentioned the call. To him, it was probably just what you do. You see a need, and you try to help." The room listened closer than ever. "I remember him coming home tired, dust on his shoes, his hands rough from work, but he always had time to ask about my day. Always told me I could be anything." She looked down, composing herself. "I laughed at you earlier today, and I regret that, because you didn't tell a bedtime story." Her eyes lifted to Kennedy. "You told me who my grandfather really was." For the first time all day, the chamber applauded. Not loud, not performative, just honest. Then Kennedy stood again, holding a second sheet of paper. "This is a draft resolution to honor Samuel Crockett's contributions to education. It's just a few words, but it's a way to say his voice mattered." Crockett's eyes widened. Her hand covered her mouth for a moment. "Senator," she said, voice thick with emotion. "He'd probably say we're making too much of a fuss." Laughter rippled gently across the room, "But he'd also be proud. And I'm proud to stand beside you on this. Let's do this for him." That room, once divided by party, power, and pride, now stood as one. The resolution passed, and later that night, a photo resurfaced. A grainy image from years ago, Jasmine, as a little girl, holding her grandfather's hand, outside Booker T. Washington High. It spread like wildfire online. This is why stories matter. This is the America I believe in. Asterisk, not because of outrage, not because of division, but because of truth and connection, and the kind of legacy that doesn't need a podium. In the days that followed, Crockett and Kennedy met privately, not as political rivals, but as people bound by a story larger than either of them. They talked about schools, they talked about funding, they talked about how to make sure more kids like Marcus Tate got to hold on to their dreams. They still didn't agree on everything, but they agreed on what mattered, and that was enough to start something new. Not every hero carries a microphone. Some carry a mop, bucket, some work late, speak once, and leave behind a legacy that echoes across generations. Jasmine Crockett laughed at Senator Kennedy, but in the end, his story didn't just silence the room, it brought it together. And that's the kind of story we need more of.